anyone can be a leader in engineering.
Okay, we did their experiment. It didn't work out, but it's fine. And we drive the conclusions. And this is a safe environment that comes from the trust.
Well, if I'm a subject matter expert and I show them that I know the most about this, they will getting work done. If people are only posting memes, that's a problem.
And then basically saying, okay, well, guys, stop. Hello and welcome. This is episode 2 of a podcast about engineering management called Going Beyond Development. My name is Olex Maestrenko. I'm a podcaster and advisor to the CEO of their Kyiv City Council in Ukraine. I have worked as an engineering manager for the last 6 years in various companies. In this podcast, we are diving into the essence of engineering management. We will explore what engineering management is and what are the challenges and opportunities. For this journey, I will invite experienced engineering managers from different parts of the world. Today's guest is Laura Tako. Hello, Laura. How are you doing?
Hi, Alex. Good to be here. I'm doing well. How about you?
Good. So, Laura, you're currently an engineering leadership coach working with engineering manager at Pfizer, GitHub, and Apple. Previously in their engineering management role since 2017, working at companies such as Nova Credit, Codeship, and CloudBees, and reaching the position of VP of Engineering at your last place. Is everything correct? Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I work with quite a lot of clients. GitHub, Apple, Pfizer are some of the names that people will recognize, but I work with quite a lot of startups as well in the seed stage to Series A. Those don't have the name brand recognition, but I really enjoy working with those kinds of leaders who are trying to build a company, build an engineering team, and often are trying to hire their very first engineering managers or promote someone into engineering management from an individual contributor, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit today as well.
Nice. Yeah, what I would like to focus today is our qualities and value of engineering manager and who can be an engineering manager. And if you're looking to become an engineering manager, what should you develop and recognize in yourself, right? Because it's different from IC and how do we go there? Before we dive into it, a short shout out to our listeners. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel. Our new videos with our engineering managers are coming our way. So before going in their qualities and what engineering manager does, let's talk about the essence, right? What is an engineering manager for you?
Yeah, I think there's a really important distinction between the word engineering manager and the job of an engineering manager versus a leader in engineering. And often that's one point that people get confused about or misunderstand early in the discussion about engineering management. Anyone can be a leader in engineering. You're a leader of yourself, or you can have leadership on your team, but management is a very specific role that entails enabling the team and helping the team get their work done in the way that is best for them. You really have to, put the needs of the team sometimes above the needs of yourself. At the same time, you'll have your own responsibilities and your own projects that are operating perhaps on the engineering organization level. Can be really tricky to balance those. But fundamentally, the role of an engineering manager is to enable teams to get their best work done.
You mentioned projects, and one of the aspects where I'm coming from is that in Ukraine we have lots of project and delivery managers, right?
Yeah.
And because the market is dominated by service companies, we do have product companies, and some of them we do have engineering managers, which is coming up. But mostly, if you look and type manager in the search for a job in Ukraine, you'll find project managers. What is different between project manager or delivery and engineering manager?
Yeah. So a project manager or delivery manager is really focused on the day-to-day tactical pieces of delivering a piece of work. That is an important part of a general engineering manager job, but I think an engineering manager job often entails other things. For example, career development of your engineering team members. It could include things like salaries, promotions, and raises for them. It might also include, in a product company, as you mentioned, working with a cross-functional team like a designer, a product manager, even marketing, and getting ideas from your cross-functional team into market, into production in front of users. So the product or project delivery would be part of that bigger engineering manager role, but the project delivery manager is a much more specialized type of management role than a general engineering manager role.
And in the name of the role, engineering manager, does it also mean that you, as an engineering manager, have to go in their engineering tasks?
Sometimes. It depends on the company, and this is a point of contention as well. There's lots of different levels of engineering manager, and the job title means a lot of different things at different companies. So, for example, as you said, in Ukraine, there's a lot of service delivery type of companies, and that manager is going to have slightly different responsibilities than a product company who is, maybe a small startup building a SaaS software. So even within engineering manager, there's a lot of variance. And then depending on your level of engineering manager, for example, if you're a team lead, that's kind of the entry-level engineering manager. You might still be expected to do coding half of your time. And then half of your time is management responsibilities, supporting people, mentoring them, working on project management. If you go all the way up the spectrum to VP of engineering in the management role, you're definitely not doing any coding or extremely little, maybe as a side project. So it's important if you're looking at moving into engineering management to understand realistically what will your day-to-day look like. Are you going to be coding, or do you just need to know enough about how software is built to appropriately support your team? And it's usually that second definition.
To kind of be able to communicate with a team in the same terms, using the same language, and facilitate the discussion with their understanding the essence of what they're talking about. Not kind of, okay, this is a server, okay, this is a box for me, but in kind of, what does it mean and how it works in details, right? Yeah.
No one is expecting you to go in and write run Terraform scripts or write your own write unit tests for code that someone else has built. That's not really an expectation, but you do need to have enough familiarity with how your service is architected, how the language works. You don't need to be an expert in the language that your team uses, but knowing how it works and some of the fundamental principles it's really important to get credibility with your team, because otherwise they might just, it might be hard to get their respect if you come across as not knowing what you're talking about.
Yeah, the credibility is a good point. Then we can move actually to their qualities, of their abilities of their engineering manager. You mentioned on your website, and I agree 100% with the trust. The first word in the coaching that you mentioned there. What is a trust for you? How to establish a trust with their engineering team, being an engineering manager?
Yeah, trust is really important in an engineering team, and trust is also one thing that takes a very, very long time to gain. And it can be lost very quickly. And oftentimes when we talk about lack of trust or needing to build trust, it's in the context of the engineers that work for you are highly skilled. They are, they're professionals. They've dedicated their career to learning how to code. They're very smart, and they know that their job skills are in demand in the market. And people like that want to feel like they can have say in what they build and how they build it. What they don't want is for an engineering manager to be perceived as, breathing down their neck and watching their every move and micromanaging everything. And that's often
and telling them what to do in details.
Exactly.
Kind of,
yeah. Why don't you do it this way? That's often the way that trust gets lost easily, is when there's a mismatch of expectations from how the team is expecting to operate versus how the engineering manager is operating, or what information they need from the team to surface to their manager. Because oftentimes that engineering manager is in a position where they need to provide updates to their boss, and they need those updates from the team, but the team may be resisting, why are you asking me for updates every day? Why do I have to do this? Isn't Jira enough? So it can be tricky to find that balance of, I trust you to do the right thing, but in order for this relationship to work, I need this, and this from you, and I trust you to give it to me when I need it, so that I don't have to ask you for it, because that's when things get annoying.
Right. And you also mentioned this on your website. There is a specifics about working with the remote teams, right? And establishing a trust in a remote setup is more challenging than establishing a trust in the offline world, right?
Yeah.
What would be kind of the several points you can mention to establish a trust in the remote team for an engineering manager?
When you're in person, you go out to lunch or you casually chat for a coffee. And all of these little interactions build what's called intimacy or a relationship. Intimacy has a lot of definitions, and I just mean, forming a personal relationship, non-transactional. So it's not that I'm going, oh, Alex, I need this thing from you. And you say, okay, here it is. That's a very transactional relationship. But we might talk about, our favorite food that we cooked or something. And that relationship building is actually a really important part of trust, because it helps me relate to you and it helps me feel that I can rely on you because we've connected on some deeper level than just work.
We have something in common that we can share, right? Outside of the work, or it can be even a work-related stuff, like we are passionate about some technology or some approach to work that we are, or even the history in the company where we worked, right, together, that we kind of have our closer connections than just, are getting tickets from Jira, as you mentioned.
Yeah. And what's hard about a remote work environment is that all of those spontaneous moments don't really exist, or they're very hard to come by, because you have a meeting scheduled at 10 a.m. and then you turn your Zoom on and you go to the meeting and you start the meeting. And when the meeting's over, you end it and you go out and eat lunch by yourself. And sometimes teams do these like forced team building activities, which sometimes work really great. I think there's a lot of good ways that you can do team building with a remote team. But sometimes they just don't work and they feel uncomfortable, and it can be difficult to connect with your remote coworkers. That makes it hard to develop that trust when you're working remotely.
Yeah, what I've seen people doing is they're establishing an unofficial channel of communication where they can share, non-work related stuff, and then basically even do this outside of the work hours if this permits, according to their company policy, location of people, depending on the time zones. Then kind of not push, but they'll share something personal, saying like, okay, I'm listening to this new music album just has been released, and what do you think about it? What are your music preferences, and so on and so forth. So kind of pushing through their unofficial channel to understand what are the interests of other teammates, right, of the engineers, and then basically use this to connect with them and establish a trust relationship.
Yeah, one of my favorite team building activities like that is sending every person a small Lego set. And then you you're in a Zoom call, maybe with a coffee or a beer or whatever you want, and people can build their Lego together in a social setting. You have something to do where you're not just sitting on a Zoom call looking at each other, looking at each other's cameras.
That's weird.
And then what you have is cool little Lego things that people can put in the background of their, of their video background. And then it's like just this nice team bonding moment.
Nice.
It's nice to blend the offline and online when you have a remote team. And as an engineering manager, your role is to really not get in the way when team members want to form those relationships, or, if you have a water cooler channel or some kind of random channel where people are putting memes or whatever. Your role as an engineering manager is not to come in and say, hey, get back to work. What are you doing here? Obviously we have to stay on track for getting work done. If people are only posting memes, that's a problem. But really kind of get out of the way, but then at the same time, create the space. Think of creative things to do to help your team get to know each other.
And do you think engineering manager can establish or create a trust by going in depth of their engineering, of their business domain? Does it make sense, or is it kind of stepping in back in their engineering role?
Here's a question for you. It's a bit of a trick question. I'll tell you that to start off with, but how do you feel, or imagine that your boss comes to your desk and starts doing your job for you? How would you feel about that?
Well, it depends how he approaches this, right? So if he says like, oh, Alex, look here, I have this idea, let's discuss about it. I already checked it out, and I have a smallish POC build over the weekend, and that I want to discuss with you and see if it makes sense for our product. that would be something interesting and something very good for the manager to come back to me, right, or to the team. But if the manager says like, look, guys, this is the way we do, and we put this framework tomorrow, and we have to deliver by the next Friday. Go. This is not the way to do, right?
Get it done. Yeah. So it is, I think in engineering, every answer is it depends. Interestingly enough, and psychologists have studied how trust is built. And there's this thing called the trust equation that you can Google that and you'll get the equation. And basically what it is it's a numerator and a denominator. So it's like a fraction. And on top you have credibility. So subject matter expertise, things like that. Reliability. How do you do what you say you're going to do? And then that intimacy, that relationship building piece. So those all get added together, and that's the top numerator. And on the denominator is this thing called self-orientation. And self-orientation means what's in it. If I'm always approaching you with something that I need you to get done to make my life easier or to be better for me, then I have a high self-orientation. And when you think about that, like, how the math works, all of the credibility and all of the reliability and all of the relationship building gets divided down to zero, to nothing, if you approach every situation with high self-interest. And what's interesting about that trust quotient is that credibility is actually a very small part of it. It's up there on the numerator, and it can be totally wiped out by having high self-interest. So a lot of engineering managers make this mistake early in their management career by saying, well, if I'm a subject matter expert and I show them that I know the most about this, they will, trust me and they will believe me. But what you do in that situation actually is you approach the situation with a high level of self-interest. It's all about you and your ego. And that cancels out any credibility that you might bring. So it's something that has to be, as you said, it really depends on how the person approaches it. Saying, hey, I have this idea. Do you want to discuss it with me? I'm interested in hearing your opinion. That has a low self-interest. You're asking for someone's opinion versus your example where your boss comes and says, this is how we're doing it. I know everything. Let's get it done. That's not really going to work. That credibility isn't going to get that manager very far.
Yeah, when we are talking about this commanding style, kind of, it makes me think of emotional intelligence, or by Daniel Goleman, where he explained like one of the leadership approaches is a commanding style.
Yeah,
and I would add then another aspect of this emotional intelligence and empathy to the team. That is a value that everyone should develop in him or herself to become a good engineer manager or a better team player in the long run, right? Independently of the management or not really the manager, but their engineer as he or she is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think empathy is important. Humility is also very important. Having to put your ego aside is something as an engineering manager you have to do all the time, because your job is to optimize the performance of the team. And sometimes that means putting your own needs aside or making space for someone else to have that great moment. Maybe, so let's go back to your example of your boss who built this proof of concept over the weekend and asked for your opinion. Another way could have been, hey, I want to give you an opportunity. Do you want to build a proof of concept of this? Like, what engineer doesn't want to build a greenfield
kind of play
POC?
Around with new things, right?
Yeah, definitely. So even though that might have been something they really wanted to do, they have to kind of say, you know what, I think someone on my team would appreciate this opportunity more than me. And that's the best thing that I can do to support my team right now. So I'm going to give someone else that opportunity. So that emotional intelligence and knowing when to be directive, when to be supportive, when to create space, it is very difficult to learn, and it just takes time and repetition. But it is something that does get easier over time. So all of you who are listening and maybe struggling with that, it does get easier. You just need practice.
Yeah, it's basically, I think I read this in their Will Larson's book, where he says like, well, think for yourself, because in the first steps as engineering manager, you are not being told what to do, and you basically discover through the hard way, sometimes very hard way, sometimes easier way, how to approach the team and how to approach this position, because their expectations might be different from company to company, and their teams are definitely different from company to company and where you're working.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it's amazing how much expectation we bring with us from previous jobs and previous experiences at work. And when you join a new team as an engineering manager, sometimes you do have to learn the very hard way, and sometimes it's a bit easier. But it's really surprising how little we talk about those expectations with a team, what the manager expects from the team, and also more specifically what the team is expecting from the manager. I find having that conversation, it doesn't matter how long you've been on that team, because chances are you might not have had it, but it's a good conversation starter for a one-on-one or a retrospective or something, to just get those out in the air, so then you can adjust your behavior according to what those expectations are.
Right, and the team is also evolving, right? With the time, people learn new things, people discover new things, and you might also might have tried some practice, some approach that didn't work, and then you have to, okay, guys, I'm trying this out, and I expect this to change. Let's see how it works. So this is also kind of going through. And but when you're saying this, you have to be also a good listener, right? A good listener, and I would say a good coach, and sometimes are psychologists, to understand their people needs. And we all know people might think and say different things, right? And it's really a value to transform what people are saying verbally and non-verbally into what people want to say, or people want to do, right?
Yeah. You touched on leadership abilities and what leadership abilities are important for an engineering manager. And the more time goes on, the older I get, the more experience I have. I actually think that debugging is one of the most important qualities for any kind of leader, and specifically engineering managers. And I'm not talking about systems debugging. I'm talking about people debugging. But strangely, it's the same process that you go through when you have an unexpected behavior in the system, and then you have to do some root cause analysis to try to break down, okay, let's do some tracing and figure out like where this is originating from and what factors are leading into it, and why are they saying what they don't mean? Why didn't they just say what they really meant? What are they afraid of? What are they worried about? Trying to get into these, into this root cause analysis. It's really important to be able to do that effectively as a leader. It does draw on empathy, humility, some of these qualities we talked about before. And understanding how to think like that it will unlock so much potential for you as a leader.
That's a very interesting analogy to kind of set the breakpoints and decompose their behavior into smaller chunks, and roll it out step by step into what kind of, why this person or why this team, right? Because you can also debug the whole team's behavior. It can be, bind it together, and you're coming as a new engineering manager, and they have experience with the previous one, and they have set some expectation, and there are some patterns of behavior, and how do you decompose and understand them? That's a nice analogy, actually.
Yeah, it's the same kind of skills that you need for debugging a distributed system. It's just that your system is people instead of machines.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the communication channel that we are using right now through the words is a way slower and
very lossy.
A very lossy, and there are with lots of errors. So take it with care when you do a debugging, and run the same line several times to make sure you understood it correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
On your website, you mentioned also two other qualities, which are autonomy and accountability. Let's talk about them a bit.
Yeah, autonomy and accountability often get lumped together because I see them as sort of two parts of the same situation. Autonomy is a team's ability to be self-directed. So this might mean deciding what to work on. It might just mean deciding how to work on it, but making some decision to say, this is how we're going to do it. We don't need to ask permission, but we're going to decide. But when teams have that autonomy to decide things, that also comes with accountability for results. That if you say, okay, we know we have this deadline coming up at the end of the month, and we want to do this project first, and we believe that there's enough time to do both of them and still hit this deadline at the end of the month. But then the end of the month comes and that other project isn't finished. There needs to be some postmortem retrospective and figuring out, okay, why was that decision made? Because your decision, the direct result is that we were late for delivering this. And so that's kind of it's two sides of the coin where you have to balance both of them. And it's not about, wagging a finger and saying like you're bad or, firing people or getting, going down necessarily bad into bad area. But there needs to be a balance between being able to make decisions for yourself as a team, but then also being responsible for the outcome of that result.
Yeah, and then it also comes to the failures, right? So learning from failures and being able to communicate the failures correctly and drive their conclusions, not looking for somebody being, well, you're wrong, or being sometimes people are wrong, but you have to be able to communicate this in a correct way depending on their team and their team setup, and bring this message to the team like, well, guys, this has happened, why? Let's unroll this again. Like the debugging based on the failure of all of us together, right? You should you as an engineering manager be apart from the team, or should you always say I'm a part of the team? What is your typical approach?
Yeah, I think a good mix is probably the healthiest. There is a power dynamic there when you as the manager are involved in discussions, and that can never be turned off, because at the end of the day, you're the one responsible oftentimes for their salaries, for approving their vacation, for performance reviews. There's this power dynamic. But it can be helpful sometimes to be, in the weeds, in the trenches with the team, to show that like you're not there as an oppositional force. You're there to help support them and to get things out of their way and help them do things. So I think it's important to be able to have that team has space without you there, that they can freely discuss things that, it might not be that they're talking about you behind their back. They just might want to bring up ideas without having about them, because it's just an early idea, for example, or something. But yeah, when something does go wrong, I usually try to first reinforce that I'm there for them and I'm there to help them correct their mistake. And through that, my job is to help them get better. That might mean holding them accountable, or helping them go through the process of figuring out who's responsible, what decision went wrong, how do we repair this? Because I also will have to share why things went wrong on their behalf. Or sometimes I invite them to the meeting to share where things went wrong. And that's part of the responsibility and accountability, so they get that experience. It's a tough balance to find sometimes.
One of the things I liked in the pre-COVID world, when there are lots of teams were offline working together, is to check out their distance and the connection between their manager and the team by letting the team work offline, offsite together, and putting the manager remote, and seeing whether it works or not. Because basically, if you're there offline and you're micromanaging them, and you put the manager remote, it's as you mentioned, it gets very hard, and it gets on the nerves much faster if you are doing something wrong in the remote world. And then basically, if you're separate, then you say, well, it works, and the whole team can go to the remote connection with their, if possible, offline meetings, offsites, where they can reconnect. But if it doesn't work, then it's already rings a bell that their connection between the manager and the team is not correct. There's some illness in this connection when you cannot work remote, because you can be there 24/7 for them, right? As you said, there are also links to other teams, links to your management. You have to talk with your peers, not only within the team, and they should work in the ideal world. That's where we're heading to.
Yeah, it's the job of a manager to have the right amount of involvement. That doesn't mean a lot of involvement. It also doesn't mean minimal involvement. It just means the right amount. And that's going to be different for every team. But generally, a failure marker that I see, as you said, it rings a bell that like something's wrong here, is when a team can't function well without running everything by their manager. That's a sign of a really unhealthy team. And also another sign would be if the team can get better work done more quickly when the manager is not there. That's still lining up to the business outcomes. That's also a sign of an unhealthy team. That says that the manager is too involved in getting in the way.
Yeah, it's basically making their team self-aware and their manager self-aware of what's going on. And I would say this is another quality of our engineering manager that someone who is going to that role should think about. Kind of, or you're there for the team, but you're also there for yourself, right? And you should raise their level of the team's self-awareness, and then it would also come with autonomy and accountability as their consequences.
Yeah.
What do you think about the transparency for their engineering manager? What level of the transparency should be there? How to set up this level?
So I think I wrote about this maybe on Twitter. I had a Twitter thread about what I just describe as shielding the team. And when I was earlier in my career as an engineering manager, I wanted to really shield the team from company politics, from all of the stuff that I just viewed as a distraction. And so that's very non-transparent, right? I'm purposely putting up a wall and saying, I'm not letting this information through to my team because I think that it's a distraction. But when I was doing that, I was making the call of what was important or not to them. And I took away the decision from them to decide whether they wanted to listen or just ignore it. And often what happens is when we try to shield the team too much, we accidentally shield too much, and we prevent them from getting access to information that they actually need to do their job, or context that's important for them to make better decisions. So transparency, I think default to transparency is one of those like platitude company values that people like to put on in a picture frame and hang it on their office wall. I think very few teams really practice default to transparency, but I always try to. I think there's very little that needs to be confidential when it comes to business operations. Certainly things, it's up to the company to decide if their salaries are confidential, performance feedback, obviously sensitive and confidential personal issues need to stay confidential. But I have worked for companies that, have our bank account balance out in the open, and we talk openly about burn rate and runway and all of these things. I find that to be very helpful, just to help me orient myself and figure out where I am. At the same time, I'm a much more experienced leader and employee than someone who is in their first job who might feel overwhelmed about having access to that kind of information. They don't have the experience to know what it means, how to contextualize it. So again, it's finding the right amount of transparency for the company, but I always go toward more transparency than less.
Well, you mentioned their money flow and the burning rate. And it might be that, their engineers, they don't see the whole picture, right? They say like, hey, this is what I get to my bank account, and this is a burning rate of the company. And there is something in between that they might not realize, right? Because it's, actually the salary for engineering managers, the equipment, their whole the benefits, and lots of a bunch of stuff that they might not realize. How do they approach and teach engineers on their money and their economics of the company?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure anyone has ever asked me that before, but I've had to have this conversation a few times, and usually we talk about it in terms of what projects we have coming up and why those projects are important. So, for example, if I'm at a company that has 12 months of runway and we are going to try to raise money, that's a really different economic position than being at a company that has 24 or 36 months of runway that just closed a round. The expectations from the executive team are different. The expectations from the board are different. And we just have more money in our bank account to do different things. So going back to that first example, when it's kind of there's like pressure on the cash flow, making a decision to make quality of life improvements for existing customers when churn is not an issue versus making a choice to build out a feature set to acquire new customers and get more revenue. It can be helpful to talk about burn rate and kind of financial position when we decide this is why we decided to prioritize getting new customers, because our burn rate our churn rate isn't very high. We're not losing customers the way things are, but what we're having trouble with is getting new customers. And that's why that's how we can increase our revenue. So putting them in very situational contexts like that, I think can help engineers connect what they're building with what's the goal of the business at this time.
So basically it's also then will not only explain their economics and how the company works and being a part of the company, but will also increase that transparency level and kind of connect better, so that the person, if he or she wants to be more involved in the company life and be more connected with their goal of the company, right? Because some of the engineers will say, Alex, I don't give a shit about that. I just want to do my code, right?
Code.
Just give me the tasks. I'm happy to dive into techniques. I'm happy to deliver. And I want my XY amount of euros, and that's it. Full stop.
Yeah.
I don't care about the customers. No.
And as an engineering manager, that's the level when you start managing a team and you're responsible for a team. You really have to understand the business a bit more and be that translation piece between business goals and your individual team members. There's a story that I often tell. It's I think every one of my clients has heard this story, but I'll tell you now for anyone who hasn't heard it. It's a story about someone's walking down the street and they see 3 workers working on something with bricks at a construction site. And they ask the first worker, "What are you doing?" And that worker says, "Oh, I'm stacking bricks." And then they ask the second worker, and the second worker says, "Oh, I'm building a wall." And then they ask the third worker, and the third worker says, "I am building a cathedral to God." They're all doing the same exact thing, but they're understanding it on really different levels. And truth is that you're going to have some people that are stacking the bricks, and that is fine. And then there are going to be some people who are, really interested in the bigger picture and what's being built, on a business scale. And it's your job to help people contextualize what those bricks stack up to, and why it's important to be doing what they're doing.
Yeah. When we are talking about people, and we mentioned a little bit about the people development and bring them to the next level, bring them to the goal. There is one uneasy topic, which is firing people, right? Which is a part of the engineering manager's job. Sometimes it's very hard. It's very hard emotional. Sometimes it's a hard decision because it's a part of the team and the person is doing well, but he or she might be really toxic and destroying the team. So it's a decision to make. What is your take? Is it a part of the job? And is it, how do you prepare yourself for this function?
Yeah, it is unfortunately part of the job. And I guess unfortunately is not even the right word for it. It feels bad, and that's why it's unfortunate. But it actually, most of the time, is the right thing to do for the people who remain on the team. And that mindset shift is, I think, something that puts it into context. So if I have to fire or choose to fire someone who is toxic and has bad culture and is making daily life really difficult for everyone on the team, that then reinforces to the people that stay on the team, these are our values and we don't tolerate people who behave this way. And that's actually quite a positive thing for the people that stay on the team. You're reinforcing positive values by having to do a really uncomfortable thing. I've had to fire handfuls of people before. I've had to do layoffs. It's never fun in the moment, but it's surprising how quickly the team will readapt. And oftentimes the team will say, "I'm so glad that you made that decision. Why did it take you so long?" Sometimes they'll say, and that always reinforces that it was the right thing to do for the team, even if it felt bad in the moment.
Yeah, you also have to be patient and human sometime, because there you might see, well, the person is not that bad, and possibly there is some personal issue or something going on that nobody really understands in the team apart from, well, you as a manager and the person, and you kind of build a roadmap how we can, well, improve the situation. Sometimes this is also the case, right? It's not only well, the toxic or, well, bad people, and with layoffs, it's I think we might have seen this story recently on LinkedIn when there was a layoff of people, and the CEO was crying, and people were having fun of him. So it's not the right way to do the layoff. How do you prepare? Or, well,
it's not the right way to do layoffs. That is for sure. Layoffs are hard because in reality, layoffs are often, how do I put this transparently, but also in a nice way? Every manager has in their head some idea of like who the people are that are struggling on the team and who the really strong performers are. I think even an individual person on a team understands where they fit in to the team, and they understand their own performance. And often when layoffs are announced from leadership and say, okay, you have to reduce your team by 10%, you naturally go to, okay, who are my lowest performers? Who do I know is looking for a job and wants to leave anyway? Can I give them a severance package so that they have a soft landing? Or other factors that kind of you've gotten indications from the people that maybe it's not the right fit, or maybe their time is up. I think where layoffs get really difficult is when all of those people are exhausted. You've already added the low performers and people that you know want to leave to the list, and you still have to make some cuts. That is really hard. And there's a lot of different techniques to decide. Some people use the technique of just eliminating like a whole arm of the team, or like a whole group of people. Another technique is looking at who might have the highest chance of getting even a better position when they go back into the job market. So there's different ways that you can make that decision, but at the end of the day, you need to make it. What I do find to be really important is that you should always meet with somebody else, that maybe the product manager or a project manager or someone else who has contact with your team, to make sure that they understand your way of making a decision, that they feel that it's fair as it can be for a bad situation.
So it's basically a second pair of eyes or ears to kind of either support or point out to you that you are doing something that will impact the company or, well, or the product.
Yeah, definitely. So when I've had to do layoffs before, I look at, okay, what does our team have to deliver in the next 12 months? And what's the minimum team that I can have in order to deliver on those goals? And then what are the skills I need? Who fits in? And that's been a helpful way to try to make those decisions. I think the layoffs that we see now that have been happening in the last 6 months are a result of overhiring and overextending budgets. And often we see, whole teams being cut, or whoever was most recently hired gets cut. Those are some other ways that companies handle the layoffs.
There is a practice. Sometimes you see this when their whole team gets cut. Their company or the manager or the team itself put like a portfolio or a list of the team members on the web. Like, look, guys, this is our whole team. You can get on board.
Yeah.
And basically, you will get a certain set of expertise that there are people who are working together, who are used to work together. And would you hire such a team or not?
So I have a controversial opinion on this, and I generally would not hire such a team. In some circumstances, I probably would, but in most circumstances, I wouldn't. And the reason is that every company is different. And when you hire a whole team, or you hire a group of friends who have worked together, number one, diversity and inclusion is generally a topic that comes up, because quite honestly, I've never seen, teams. Usually, commonly in startups, what I'll see is like teams of 4 to 5 engineers who have worked together at a different company looking to join a different company together. And it's all men. Generally, it's like this group of coworkers, and it's not their fault that it's all men, but that is how it works out. And that's it kind of puts the team on quite a different path when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and it might work against other goals that they've set for the way that they hire and, different standards for how they hire. The second reason is that I've never seen a situation where every single person in that entity was someone that would have passed the hiring process independently. So then what you get is maybe there's 3 people who are great hires and then 2 people who aren't great hires, which then become performance problems that you have to manage, and it just becomes more work. And then the third thing is onboarding and integration. Because they already have their systems of working, it can be really difficult for them to be okay with not working with each other, or if someone has to switch teams. It just adds a lot more complexity when you hire as a unit and bring whole units of teams into a company.
Right, because they have their culture or connection that they have developed previously, and each company is different, as we already mentioned, and then they come in a different culture, and what can happen that if the company is a small startup, they can re-influence the company and kind of set their culture, which is different from the original culture. It can be both good and bad, depending on both culture mix. But I guess the founders of the company have defined their own culture, and now they are opposing something new that comes in their plate in their team.
Yeah. One scenario where I could see that working really well is, as we talked about before, the type of service delivery company where this is a delivery team who can work pretty autonomously and get requirements from a product owner or project manager, and then within themselves is just responsible for execution. And there's much more emphasis just on the work being done versus trying to fit into like a product company culture and all the ways of working. I could see that working really well with just bringing in, an established team who already knows how to work together. They're ready to start executing quickly. So that would be one scenario that is kind of the anti-example where it could work really well to bring in people.
Might be, from my experience in their service company, you get this amount of people as in a service unit. They start delivering. At one point in time, it might happen that somebody wants to leave, or their service that you are delivering is performing very well, and you want to add additional people. And then basically the same thing happens as in the product company, right? You want to add people, but you want to add them in the way you are doing, not those people we're hiring. And if some people want to leave or want to change within your service company, you still have to adapt their culture or adapt their vision to your company to be able to shift them internally to a different project. And if it's on the other way, if their service goes down, then you also have to we have a room for 3 people, whereas we have 5 people. We have to move 2 out of 5 to a different product. And then, how do we select? How do we break their team? If you manage to do this, then you're very successful, and then we have a cross-team collaboration and cross-team connections. And then you can also spread the knowledge across your bigger company rather than just a small project. And we did a project there, so we can connect and ask and consult and kind of build their cross-team expertise, right? That people can work and help with.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've had some experience with this as well.
Yeah. I didn't have a lot of layoffs. I had to do some layoffs, but they were in a smaller company. And when hiring, I got myself in a position where we hired several people from the same company, from a different company. And then I saw their shift of the culture.
Interesting.
And then basically saying, okay, well, guys, stop. Yes, I know there are additional engineers there, but I stop. Well, as a manager, the hiring manager, I stop that channel And I discussed with HR that we shouldn't hire from that company on purpose, and we should look for other sources of hiring, like growing internally or other companies, so that we still keep our culture, but not the culture of for company X, where we have hired quite some people.
Yeah, makes sense.
That was a problem. So we talked about, let's recap. We talked about trust. We talked about emotional intelligence. We talked about autonomy, accountability. We talked a little bit about failure, self-awareness, coaching, or transparency. Do you want to add additional values that we should cover?
I think those are really the big ones. Quite honestly, debugging is a great ability to have as well. And I think maybe to the other quality or ability would be an experimental mindset and understanding that a failure, let's say we have a hypothesis that we want to test and our hypothesis is proven false or untrue, not validated. That's not necessarily a failure. That is a successful experiment. We wanted to find out if something was true or not, and we found out it wasn't. That distinction can have a big impact on how your team does their work and whether they feel safe or not to experiment with things or, take chances. Because if everyone's being punished all the time for something not being validated or something not working, that can really stifle creativity and innovation. So that openness to failure, being able to do experiments and reinforce that experimentation in the team is really important for an engineering manager, especially when working at a product company.
Would you call this a kind of a safe environment for experiments, so that, you let people experiment or driven by their curiosity, driven by business needs, and then you are there as a manager to kind of put a pillow when they fall and say, okay, we did their experiment, it didn't work out, but it's fine, and we drive the conclusions, and this is a safe environment that comes from the trust. Would you call this a safe environment or something different? Yeah,
I think safe is a good word. Usually the phrase is psychological safety is often thrown around to describe an environment where people feel safe to make mistakes and admit to when they were wrong or admit when something didn't work out, because they're not afraid of being fired for every little mistake. So that's something that as a leader and as a manager, you can do by highlighting times when you made the wrong decision or when you had the wrong assumption or thought something would be true and it wasn't, and showing that that's a natural part of discovery and being curious and being, doing innovation work, not as something that should be punished.
Yeah, you mentioned curious, and this is indeed one of the thoughts or one of the words I want to mention, the qualities, because but it's not only for managers, right? It's for all the engineers
to
everybody. kind of be curious and try different things. So look at there, because don't stop right there. Just be curious and try to evolve their team and evolve for the practices, and that would help you with their debugging. I really like that analogy.
Yeah. Getting curious about why something happened and, going through your debugging and figuring it out that's a cycle that you'll practice every day, whether you're an engineering manager or even an individual contributor engineer. It's such an important cycle.
Yeah, and on the other hand, it can be also like troubleshooting, which could also come closer in some situations, right? When you run into trouble with the team, then you're, as with their software, you have to troubleshoot to understand the reason, to collect the logs, to collect the situation analysis, and then kind of, that's the reason. How do we fix it?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a little bit different from the debugging, because debugging you typically go with the system that's you're building, but the troubleshooting is an established software that you're installed or that you're configuring, and then kind of, this is a team, and they're being able to talk and communicate, and they're kind of understand between the lines, but also what you mentioned, setting the expectations and then verifying, right, what you've heard is right. In our conversation with Tiago in the first episode, he mentioned like what he does is when he talks to somebody is he asks somebody to say in his or her own words what the person just heard, to do this verification and the feedback loop. from their in the debugging or troubleshooting process.
Yeah, it's a really powerful technique, and also something being a good listener is an important quality of being an engineer, an engineering leader. But oftentimes we listen with the intent to respond and not with the intent to understand. So practicing that, even just internally, saying, "Oh, could I rephrase what I just heard?" Or asking someone, "Can you, just to make sure that we're on the same page, can you share what you're taking away from this conversation?" It's really interesting to hear what some responses can be and how different they might be from what you thought you said.
Yeah, the communication channel is wired sometimes, and losing lots of information, like literally.
Yeah.
So we talked about lots of abilities and qualities, but we missed the most important thing, like why people become engineering managers in the first place.
Yeah.
What is your take on that?
So I can speak for myself first. So I'll do that. I moved into engineering management because I realized that I got a lot of satisfaction from helping more people beyond what just building a system or doing code could do. I became, over time, a bit more interested in the why and the what versus the how of how we build something. And so that's what led me to move into a management position. I wanted to have, first of all, more influence at the company in general, beyond just the scope of my team. But I also knew that I had a very specific set of strengths and qualities that could help my team. And that's usually what I find when I work with leaders who have just moved into engineering management. Some are doing it out of necessity. They are first-time founders, or they've co-founded a company, and now they found themselves in the position of CTO. They need to hire engineers, and they've never really done management before, and they need extra help. I have quite a few clients like that. And others that are moving from being an individual contributor to a manager because they want to be a multiplier for other people versus just working on their own work.
No. And do you think it's a good or passive somebody being promoted or from IC to engineering manager? Like, well, you take their best IC on your team and you promote this person to EM. Is it a good decision?
It is not. It's not a good decision. I think that engineering management is seen as a promotion, and I think that's fine. You often get a higher salary, you have a title, you have power. All of those things tell about a promotion. But in reality, engineering management is it's a different job. It's a branch away. And if you are a really great technical person, really great at coding, it can be that you do not have the skills that you need to be a great engineering manager. And similarly, there are going to be really great people on your team who might be a middle performer when it comes to coding, but are going to be really outstanding engineering managers because they just need different skills. And when someone moves into the engineering manager role, it's not that they're the best coder or that they were the best person on the team. It's that they're the best person for the job. Those are two really different things.
No, well, people can say I'm a good debugger with the code, and I can debug people as well, right?
Yeah.
Using our analogy.
Yeah.
But this is not your change their material, so to say, and we're going from bits and bytes to people which are extremely versatile, whereas in the code it's more straightforward, so it's very complex. I don't take out the complexity. Yeah,
it's very complex, and also your feedback loops as a manager are really different. As an engineer, you pick up a ticket, you work on something, you commit it, open a PR, ship it to production. You have this nice satisfaction loop where you've done something and you have something to show for it. When you're a manager, you might sit for 6 hours a day in meetings and feel like you're getting nothing done. But the reality is that the meetings are your work now, and the conversations are your work now. And you have to really unlearn a lot of what you learned as an engineer and relearn how to feel good about what you're doing as a manager. Otherwise, you're going to have, at the end of every day, the worst feeling that you're not doing anything and you're getting nothing done and you're very ineffective.
That's true. You mentioned why you became an engineering manager. Do you miss anything from your IC past?
Oh, definitely. I really liked being able to go super deep and understand the very, very specifics of, this last Kubernetes release and all the new things that I could do and how exactly I would use it. And, I really like understanding things to such a fine level. I do miss that. You can try to do it, for side projects, but you're just not building things to the same scale as you are when you work for a company. Most of what I miss is those quick feedback loops where I have a task and I can just do it and get it done and cross it off my list, because that is sometimes hard to find as a manager. So I just try to find things like that to do, at least 1 or 2 things a day that I can just finish and feel good about, and then work on some longer term projects.
And do you have any advice, or how do you keep up your technical knowledge when you have all those management tasks and there are people that you are supporting? So how do you still being able to see what's going on in the technical perspective of our world?
Yeah, the way that you generally will learn is more by reading and asking questions of your own team versus being the expert yourself and practicing. So before, as an individual contributor, you might be doing research, or you might be discovering something or inventing something. Whereas as a manager, you can really rely on your team to give them the opportunity to teach you what's new. And that can also be really beneficial for them. But I think, reading blogs, watching videos, taking courses, those are all things. It's just that you have to recognize that you might learn about it, but you're not going to practice it at work, which means that it's probably not going to stick as much. But it's still important for you to understand the principles and the architecture and all of those things. It's also important to think about what job you want next. Some people go into engineering management and think, okay, this is great, I'm going to go back to being IC for my next job. In that case, it's really important to stay active in practicing your technical skills. But if you're aiming for, director or VP of engineering, those hands-on coding skills get less and less important, and other skills become more important. So it might not make sense to invest so much time in trying to stay current with specifics of a language, and instead focus more on architecture and general trends.
Yeah. But when you apply for, or some company out of Funk or Meta, they do ask engineering managers to go through their coding exercise.
Yes.
So that you're kind of, can read the code, do the code review, or write a little bit of code, possibly on a different level than their engineering interview. But as far as I understand, they kind of downshift the level of the manager. So if it's L6, they require L5 coding skills.
Yeah. And, some companies like, I think Google still does this, where they will have the engineering manager be an individual contributor on their team for some number of months before putting them into a full-time management role. Their philosophy is that everyone and the leader of the team should be able to do the work of the team. And so they give you an opportunity to learn how to do that before moving you into a management role.
Interesting.
Not every company does that. It's definitely a different technique.
Yeah, so every company is different, and you just, as an engineering manager, have to kind of set up your mind and set up your path where you want to go. If it's more technical, more people management, but definitely their people management is an essential part of every engineering manager in every company.
Definitely.
Good. Thank you, Laura, for this conversation. It was very interesting, very structured on the values, and there was lots of input from your side. If people want to reach out to you or read more about your tweets or your information that you put in online, where they can find you?
The easiest way to find me is to go to laurataco.com. There's a link to my LinkedIn, my Twitter, my blog is there as well. You can subscribe to my newsletter. I do a free engineering leadership newsletter every other week with questions that I get in coaching or questions that I get from people on Twitter. I just answer them in public. So you can kind of get the benefit from the coaching experience I have. But that's free. You can sign up there. Just go to laurataco.com.
Nice. Thank you again for being here and for this conversation.
Yeah, it was great. It was great talking with you. And I hope your audience has learned a little bit more about engineering management.
Well, let's see the comments in the YouTube, dear listeners. Yeah. Please put in the comments what would you like to cover more, and I'll forward their several questions if they are relevant to Laura to see if this can be transmitted in their Twitter thread.
Yeah.
so that this can be brought to a bigger audience, and people can learn from you, from the community.
Yeah, sounds great.